What do I bring? The male santeros, those of today, are painting pieces in a harsh, darker way. And for me, this feminine side brings some warmth, brings some... Santos should look friendly. You should be able to talk to them. They should always seem friendly. And so that is important. That's what I bring, I believe, in terms of the feminine side. For those of us who work with the santeros, women, we can probably hold our own. We can, I have been included into major projects with the guys and feel very honored to be a part of it. But it's also important to have that feminine side and to tell the story, a feminine side of the story. Let's put it this way. In colonial times, it was only the Hispanic men who connected with the community. Although I think women were involved, someone was there to make the wigs and the gowns for these beautiful santos. They just never got the credit. Today, there are more santeros and santeras making a living doing this. So today, we are santeros and santeras who are making a living, producing the saints. But there is sort of we tell stories, and of course that's what New Mexico is about, isn't it? Just to tell the stories. There's a culture here. New Mexico is such a unique, special place. You know, we have our music, our food. We name our streets after saints. So why don't we tell the stories of the saints? We have our own artwork. Life in New Mexico is about family, tradition, culture, and faith. So for that reason, we tell the stories through our work. As a santera, it becomes important for me to tell the story in a way that relates to folks who perhaps may not understand why it's about saints, why it's and that it's a traditional form that is hundreds of years old, and you didn't see a feminine side. While you saw in the early santero someone who could probably paint very well, but then there were others that couldn't. They tell their stories in their own way. I decide that I add gold leaf, perhaps. Maybe it's the sparkle, the bling, it lights it up, and the first look at a piece shows that I want it to light up and talk about the story of that piece. If it's a male or a female saint, they both have a story. I've often heard people say to me that the eyes say something, and there's an old saying, eyes are the windows to the soul. I don't know. I paint what I feel. Sometimes it could be my daughter or granddaughters in the face of this saint. The eyes to me mean something. I need to know who I'm talking to, so I paint the face in first. I just want to be able to give each face a warmth, and it says something about this particular saint. They are strong. I talk to them all the time. I think that those stories need to be told. The eyes say something, you know. Often I put makeup on them. Yeah. I feel as though it's important that the eyes say something to you, yes. I don't know. It's something that I do unconsciously. I just want to, I paint for what I'm feeling at the time, and it comes out. Well, let's talk about women of colonial times who had to work alongside the men and work very hard. It was not an easy life. So there was the early Santera who produced the work of santos, yes, and there was a woman right alongside of this Santero, I'm certain, that probably produced the work just as well. There may have been schools in which the women were involved. I believe that's so. But they didn't get much credit in terms of their names on pieces. We don't know of any pieces that were actually done solely by a woman that is documented. So today, the women, the santeras of today, carry on a tradition that probably was brought from the women of earlier times. It speaks to what we want to say in terms of the imagery, the softness, the beauty, yes, these saints lived harsh, perhaps torturous lives, but they led extraordinary lives as well. And so what we want to do is bring out that story, but in a warm way, where it's not as harsh, sometimes morbid. I've heard that, the word before. For me, it's important to draw the viewer in and talk to these folks. I've often said it can't hurt to have a santo in every home. And for those folks that are interested in my santos, what do I want from that? I want them to have some spirituality or see the spirituality within it. But perhaps it can't hurt to have a santo in every home. What I think I've brought to the form, to the tradition, is perhaps the story that I want to say, and that is that we came from harsh times, lived harsh times. I don't know where I want to go with this. I guess I'm not quite sure where. Yes, the saints do reflect New Mexico. I prefer to paint my saints very New Mexican. If whether it's you know, there were tough times in colonial times. Today, I think we're just as tough. But we're telling a story about what our saints say to us, where we're going with the story. They help us. We don't adore saints, but we ask them to help us. And we're still doing that to this day. Here we are in a very technical, very modern time, and we're still asking these saints to come to help what it is what we need. That happened way back when. It's still happening today. Today I paint the faces that for me are very New Mexican. We belong to New Mexico. The saints belong to New Mexico. We're telling the stories of devotion and faith. We're telling the stories that, all right, then let's start this way. Let's tell the story about, we have probably 30, 35 saints that are well known in New Mexico. Those of us who've been here a long time know about Santo Niño de Atocha. know about San Jose, Saint Joseph, who was a strong saint. He must have been an extraordinary man. Today, we tell the story about Saint Joseph, who carries a staff, a flowering staff. In New Mexico, the hollyhock is named the Vara de San Jose, the staff of Saint Joseph, or Varita de San Jose, the little staff of Saint Joseph. In my work, I find it totally necessary to include the hollyhock, the Varita de San Jose, within any imagery where San Jose is involved. But it goes back to a family story in my life, because my dad, who had 4 daughters, eventually a son, but 4 daughters, would keep us busy, and he brought us to my grandma's house in northern New Mexico and he taught us to make hollyhock dolls out of the blossom, which was the skirt, the bud, which was the head. And I remember putting together little parties or, weddings. So for me, it talks about family, and it talks about my background and my story. But it's also talking about New Mexico, where the hollyhock is so prevalent and so beautiful. And so consequently, I've left it not only to San Jose, but I include the hollyhock in many of my pieces. It's talking about me and what it means to me. I find such peace doing what I do. And for that, the idea of sitting down to do something that means so much to me, to talk about New Mexico and my faith, I find peace. But actually, I've been an artist all my life, all right? And I've been painting devotional imagery all my life. I grew up in Catholic school. I'm nun-raised. The fact is that I find when I was doing more secular pieces, it was very nice. I was continuing my creativity. But moving over to the Santo imagery, which is where I'm supposed to be, what I'm supposed to say, means so much more. It's helped me through life considerably. If there is an issue that I'm dealing with, I can sit down at my drawing table and erase everything. It may be to 3 in the morning, but I can erase the difficulty of today's world and bring in what I need to find peace. And that is doing the work that I do, the work that I was meant to do. It was in me all along. As I said, I was brought up in Catholic school, a very small school. I have background in northern New Mexico, roots in Cuesta and Costilla, which mean quite a bit to me. My brother was involved with Spanish Colonial Art Society and was serving on the board at the time when he said to me, "You need to become involved," which I did. And I knew the Santo imagery. I was completely familiar with the early pieces. I never once realized that was going to come into my life as something that I would do creatively. And I'm loving the fact that my brother brought me in, and I continue to do that. I found something where I needed to. I found a place where I needed to be. It brings me back. It brings me full circle. That's how I should put it. It just brings in where I was at a young age, because my mother taught, who was also nun-raised, my mother taught me how to pray. She taught us all how to live our lives, talked about the stories of the saints, talked to us always about certain saints. Saint Teresa was one of her favorites, and so we knew the stories that she would tell. My father encouraged the art form and encouraged the art, which is why today I, as a tribute to him, I continue to use my maiden name. That's important. So all of that background brings me full circle, where I never thought I would be painting the saints that I painted as a young child. Yet whenever my grandfather was a sheep herder. I never knew my grandfather. He died long before I was born. But he left pieces. Apparently he would go off into Wyoming or wherever it was that he was and did his work. But he would take books, prayer books, and pieces to work with. So he brought back with him, and I have one, which is a pencil drawing on flour sack. He was a santero. And so when I realized that, no, I don't know that this was carried down from generation to generation, of course it was. I'm following in my grandfather's footsteps without knowing. And I'm carrying on the devotional faith that he had in the art form that he had. So that's become important to me. He has, I have this prayer book. It's sort of an old diary that he took with him. He wrote in his alabados and his prayers in this fine script. It is a beautiful example of what men in those days were thinking and doing and learning. And so for him, I knew his faith was strong. I wish I knew him. I've been drawing and painting all my life. What I do is feminine. I can't help it. It's who I am. And for that reason, I think in my work, the saints become probably prettier in a lot of ways. Sometimes even the male saints look almost feminine, but that's okay. That's fine. They're soft and they're warm and they're friendly. They evoke a newness that wasn't there with the early pieces. They bring even just some sort of devotion, some sort of prayer. In my eyes, that's what I see, is that they're also praying. They're also telling me stories. So when I'm doing the work and I'm adding the softness and the eyes need to say something to me, as I mentioned, I need to know who I'm talking to, who I'm speaking with while I'm doing the work. That's become a very important aspect. All right, so I believe that when a viewer sees one of my pieces and they connect, and I hear the comments about this is something that I can go home with or that I can connect with, tell me about this piece, tell me about this saint. I want to know this story. Why is he carrying a fish, or why is what's the story of the scale, or why are there so many daggers, and why does this imagery is so sad? And for instance, Our Lady of Sorrows, Dolores, who has 7 daggers in her heart. It's a harsh story. It's a harsh image, but it's so positive in terms of patronage. She is patron of women who want to have children. She's a healer. She helps in times of sorrow. So it's a positive patronage with a harsh image, but I can soften the image, perhaps with just the eyes. The eyes can be sorrowful, but beautiful in the same way. The image itself can tell a story that is harsh, but softened a little bit. I think that's important. People who connect to the pieces must connect in a way that makes them feel good, and must connect in also so they tell the stories, so that they can pass on what it is that's important in terms of this tradition. A patronage, an attribute that identifies him or her with who they are. And so we talk about St. Anthony, who always holds the Christ child, the Niño. And it's a very soft image, but he's patron of the home, patron or protector of the family. But then you add the imagery and add the attributes such as the lyre, the guitar, the piano for Saint Cecilia in her imagery, because she's patron of musicians. And then there's the Santo Niño de Atocha, who is a very ornately dressed child sitting in a chair, and he holds a staff and a gourd, and perhaps a basket with food or bread or wheat to symbolize food. And he is known to bring out, to tell the story about the Santo Niño is to talk about he fed prisoners. He walks the hills of New Mexico doing good deeds and feeding those who don't have anything to eat. And so consequently he wears out his shoes. And today in the Santuario de Chimayo, there are pilgrims who bring baby shoes to the Santo Niño de Atocha. These stories just go on and on. There's Santa Librada, who is patron of independent and liberated women. Well, Santa Librada never actually lived. She's totally legendary. But she's patron of liberated women because, here's the legend, her father wanted her to marry a heathen and she would have nothing to do with it. And so she prayed very hard that she wouldn't have to marry anyone. She was totally devoted to God. And one day she just grew a beard. Well, this enraged her father so much that he had her crucified. It's a very sad, hard story to tell. And today, the image, if it's painted by a male, will often paint a woman crucified with a beard. I can't bring myself to paint a beard on her. So what I paint is a very lovely woman, crucified, yes. And she's patron of independent and liberated women. That's exactly it. She's wanting her life as she wants it. And she's telling her story as she wants it. And here we go again with the feminine, the male side and the feminine side, the masculine side and the feminine side, who some santeros would be fine with painting a beard on her. The santeras, on the other hand, do not. I've never really seen that in santera type work. That's the differences in terms of telling the story. We can tell the same story of Santa Librada. and know that she would want us to tell the story with her as a lovely woman, although crucified. She would want us to tell that story. It's women of today, they want to show only their good side. Well, who knows? Santa Librada may have wanted the same thing. This tradition, this art form is devotional, yes, but it's also historic. And so when I talk about the tradition, I'm also speaking in terms of history and in terms of culture and who we are. Today, there are more santeros and santeras making a living doing what we do. And there's a bonus to that we can make a living. There are folks out there who are perhaps looking for their spirituality or their culture and tradition in terms of New Mexico. And so there is always the side that says, I'm doing this because I want to tell the story and I want to pass on what is important in terms of religion and faith and devotion. But there's also the side that says to me, I can make a living. I can, there is a commercial side to it, and there is, how do I say this? We're talking about 400 years of faith and devotion, but we're also talking about today's world in which, when I was growing up, could I have made a living doing what I'm doing? I don't know, but I do today. And it's fine. No, it doesn't get in the way I want to make a living doing this. It was what I was meant to do. It is what I am meant to do today. I need to do it. And if I make a living, that's the bonus. If I were to do this the rest of my life, I'm perfectly fine with it. The fact is that if someone had said to me years ago that I'd be doing what I'm doing, I would never have believed it. Because I probably, when you're immersed in what I was, which was Catholicism and Catholic school and all that came with it. I wore a plaid uniform for years. So coming back to santo making and to the saints and knowing the stories and knowing that was where I was eventually going to end up, I would never have believed it. When I have of course, there's always the little old lady who wants to take home a santo. It's because it means something. She connects to it in a certain way. For the collector, it may mean something entirely different. Does it matter? No. When it leaves the studio, for me, it is a devotional piece. It says to me, pass on your history, pass on your faith, and pass on your culture. It's totally important, and it talks only to New Mexico. In this small, very unique spot in the whole world, there is southern Colorado and northern New Mexico, Spanish New Mexico, that brought this tradition to the forefront. It was known only to the faithful, I believe. It almost died at one point in its lifetime. But today, we find it important to carry that on, to bring it forward again, and to make sure that it's understood that it talks about New Mexico. this little spot in the world that brings us the stories that can go to every part of the world, and talk about New Mexico. You know, we name our streets, we name our towns, we name our pueblos after saints. Why? How did that happen? Because it was early New Mexico that was talking about something that was very important to them, and today is still very important. Well, let's talk about faith and family. Probably the reason that I connected with this form is because it was a family thing. It was something that I learned early on that was important, that I didn't appreciate as well. And so when we talk about it, it also talks about, I forgot where I was going. When we talk about who I am, I guess, I'm Norteña. My first language was Spanish. It was a time and place where that was perfectly common, and it was something that it was a world that I lived in. We moved here, and I find that there's sort of this dichotomy where I'm having to live and experience two worlds, where I love the world I came from, which is northern New Mexico, speaking Spanish, first language, and talking about always family and faith. And I remember the old church in Costilla, where a second home. But then we come and fast forward to today, where there is still New Mexico, but I want to connect to who I was as a Norteña. I still want that connection today. It's important to me to continue telling the stories of early New Mexico, or of Hispanic New Mexico, or of rural New Mexico, and the villages, you know, and the little towns that really connect to this faith that we all have, to the struggles, the harshness of what was early New Mexico. We all know the story of the processions of taking San Isidro through the fields of crops, praying for rain. The processions, which in rural New Mexico, in Hispanic New Mexico, coming out of churches with the banners and carrying a santo and honoring this santo for a reason. And what are those reasons? And should we continue those stories and talk to our children about that, so it's not taken away, it's not forgotten, and it continues to be important to those who go on after us. We need to keep ourselves, we need to know who we are. We need to talk about who we are. We need to be proud of who we are, and to teach our young people that these stories, these traditions, this art form is so important. Our faith is so important, and that it doesn't get minimized. Without the faith, without the prayers, without the story of, for instance, San Isidro, we lose who we are. The story of San Isidro being, you know, in procession through the crop fields, and talking of, and Well, okay. We grew up knowing processions with the saints. We knew rural churches in New Mexico with the saints, the processions and the special days and the tell who we are. If we lose that, and if those that come after us don't know it, then we lose who we are culturally. New Mexico is so special and so unique, and that's why people want to get to know who we are. San Isidro is patron of farmers and laborers, and has been for eons. But in recent times, gardeners have been added, patron of gardeners, patron for land deals, and surveyors, and anything to. So he's been modernized in many ways, because we need that connection to this modern world. We need to know that San Isidro is still there. He is so connected to he is so connected to New Mexico. It's how we made a living. If it was in farming, if it was in laboring, today he is. There's more to it. There's not only land deals and property taxes, and so it brings in the modernness, and so we don't release San Isidro even in modern times. We don't forget any of the saints in modern times. We just adapt them to our modern times and to today, because our faith is necessary, because our stories are necessary, because our culture is necessary and important. So we have these saints that have been telling the stories for generations. Let's not forget that. Let's continue those stories, and let's continue to pass that on. The only way that can happen is through the traditions, and through the art form, and through the santos, and through my work, through the work of the santero and the santera. It's telling the stories over and over and over again. It must happen. We will never understand who we are if we don't live it. And in order to live it, you have to know where the story goes. You have to know, you have to be in there with the story. And if you don't know San Isidro, or if you don't know San Antonio or Santo Niño de Atocha, then it's time we need to tell more stories. So it becomes my duty, almost a responsibility. It becomes a responsibility for all santeros and santeras that we pass on, continue this tradition, make it modern in some ways, and continue to tell that story in a way that is understood by those who don't understand. Today, some of the saints have been modernized or have been adapted to today's world. For instance, there is San Antonio, who's not only finder of lost articles, but did you know that he is prayed to for women who want to have children, or for women who want to find a worthy husband, keyword worthy, and he's patron against fire, and he's patron against, and patron for the family. Those are all very old patronages, but did you also know that he's there to find your lost animal? He's San Jose today is actually patron of a happy death, but he's patron of fathers and woodworkers and carpenters. But we also know that he's helpful in selling a house. And so there's this legend that if you bury St. Joseph, a statue of St. Joseph in your yard. He will help you sell your home. But it's also important to replace your St. Joseph once your home has sold. So the stories become adapted to today's world. For Saint Anthony is patron of speech makers and authors, and so he continues on and continues to be adapted to to much of what is today's world. While these stories have gone generations, today we continue to tell them, but we need to continue to tell them. We need to, and how do we do that? Well, we pass on the stories to our children and our grandchildren, and they tell the stories. They can tell the story in any way they want. What it is that for me, if I paint it in a contemporary version, perhaps putting Santo Niño in a very modern world, that would be one way. I continue to want to paint him very traditionally, because that needs to happen. That needs to be told and passed on so that our audience understands that this is where it is. That's how you tell the story. That's what you're doing. Is that you end it. You have to talk about why do we tell these stories? Is it to retell the story over and over again? Absolutely, it's important. And that's the only way we know and we keep that for future use. Everyone paints them, and there are those that paint themselves in them, I think unconsciously. But you see the face of the artist in that painting or in that santo. It's very common. How does that happen? So you're putting yourself, your heart, yourself into the piece, and talking creatively, but talking about you and what that means to you, and unconsciously in many ways. And so how does that happen? It's purely by accident, but it happens. It's always about talking about current, talking about past, bringing it around full circle. You can adapt the story to current times, but you also have to remember how to tell the story within its past, within its history, and bring it all together to tell one story and retell it, continue to retell it and retell it. It brings us history, it brings us faith, and it talks about who we are. If we're a family of faith, or if we're a culture of faith, how do you continue that? You have to tell it in a way that folks understand it's who you are, it's what you bring, but it's innate. It's what we have within, and it's natural, and it's earned. But then it's also something that we grow up with and instilled deeply. For myself, I know it was because I had a mother who had strong faith and taught us all what we needed to carry our faith forward. I hope that I do that in my own children and grandchildren. That's important. That's how we carry on who we are and how we carry on this faith. The saints, the stories that we know that are all too common. But are they? Do people really know these stories currently? So for that reason, it becomes my duty, a job, a responsibility to tell the story in my work. And that's what I feel I need to do. There is definitely a feminine aspect. What people see in the work that I do is commonly, people say to me all the time, now this I can connect with, or this is different. For me, it's talking about my work as something that needs to connect, something that needs to, I don't know, it's hard. Yeah, the feminine and the masculine side of it all. It's just, it's obvious to me, I guess. It's just so obvious that there is a soft, and the colors are much different, and the drama is there, but it's still friendly and warm. And perhaps the other side of that is the masculine side, where the colors are bolder, and they're more dramatic in a lot of ways, but they also tell a story in a unique way. I don't know. There's a lot to be said, to be involved and to be sort of brought in to what I felt in the beginning was a man's world, and to be offered the opportunity to come into projects where there were santeros, and only santeros. I probably at the time was the only woman doing, and these were major projects. And so it was such an honor to be brought into, first of all, a man's world. Second of all, there was sort of this insecurity I had that my work would be so different, and does it all connect, and is it cohesive, and does it bring it all together? Well, yes, of course, because it's like living life. Life is about softness and harshness and color and drama and all of the wonderful things. And so when you're working on a piece where it's both male and female santeros and santeras, or santera, to be brought into that, I felt connected, and I felt appreciated, and I felt like I was in the right place. There's quite a few times where someone will approach the work to say, oh, I can't connect to this style because it's even scary. And I don't want to say that, okay. But that's what I get, mm-hmm. is that they're very often, oh, this is different. And why is it different? Because it's a different approach. It's just it's a softer, it's warmer, and I think that they can identify to the face, they want to know a little bit more, and that's where I'm willing to go. I'm willing to engage the viewer and to ask the questions, because I'm curious. I want to know, what is it that you see out of this that while the early pieces were lovely, they were beautiful works of art, I'm happy to bring the newness and this different approach, which is feminine, to it all. If the eyes are different, or if the mouth, if the face just talks to you and looks as though you can talk back, then it says it all. That's what it says. And it is storytelling in a very unique way. But, and I lost it, I just had it. It's telling, let's see, what did I want to say? It's about storytelling. It's about talking about colonial New Mexico. It's about talking about new, modern New Mexico. I'm proud and happy to do it. I think it's something that, do people want to know more about this art form? Yes, they do, because it's about storytelling. Do I want to tell the stories for those who come and want to know more? Yes, because it's important to talk about New Mexico and its culture. Do I want to pass this on for generations to come? Absolutely, because then we lose who we are. We don't want to do that. We want to continue to tell the stories and to talk about our traditions. I think we cut to the face first. At least, of course, it's what we believe, that if we approach a saint, if we ask them for either intercession or for favors, that certainly they understand that that's what we're looking for in life, is we just need a little bit of help. I think in the days of early santo making, people believed that there were certain patronages, certain views of how a particular saint was supposed to help. And certainly over time, I believe that for those who were doing the actual production of saints, they probably made up their own stories in many ways, made up their own views of each saint in their own particular way. And so that continued the telling of the stories and perhaps the history behind it Who knows where all these stories began and where they came up with the ideas for particular patronage. It's natural pigments for the most part. And a few years ago, my dad, who's from Cuesta, said that there was a pocket of oxides. It was iron oxide there on a mountain in Cuesta. He knew exactly where it was. And he says, is this what you've been working with? Is this what you want to paint with? And I said, if you have access to it, I'd love to have some. So he and a friend of his climbed this mountain just outside of Cuesta, between Cuesta and Costilla, and came back with 3 colors of iron oxide. It's sort of a gold, and then a red gold, and a almost off-white. And so I still use them to this day. There's micaceous clay, indigo, and cochineal. And I mix some of the commercial in with it, only because I think I'm trying to save some of it, trying to preserve some of the pigments so I don't run out.